Okay, now we're into Feln. Oh joy, Feln. Feln is full of much joy for all players, and it wants to share it and share all of its love. Twilight Raptor, 2-2 flying for 1. The only 2-2 flying for 1 in the game. This card is decent. It's pretty strong in some of the smaller fast decks that use Gorgon Swiftblades and other blue purple cards to win out very very quickly. It's a good statted card. You can play it on turn 1 sometimes with Feln Banner with Seed of Cunning, but it's not super reliable at doing that. Overall, it's not too terrible. Certainly sees play in Standard. Very good card in Draft. Gorgon Swiftblade 2/3 Infiltrate Deadly Quick Draw. This card is kind of beastly, actually. I really like this card. It's a very good statted creature at 2, and if it actually manages to attack in, it becomes an impossible thorn in the side that has to be killed by some other means. Deadly and Quick Draw means that it's going to kill 2 creatures that it blocks immediately before they deal damage back, so you have to at least triple block it once it's got its Infiltrate off, and there are a lot of ways to get its Infiltrate off. Yeah, so as a result, this card is really quite obnoxious and lovely in Feln tempo decks. Grim Stranger. When one or more strangers attack, deal that much damage to the defending player. This is the strongest stranger on the map right now, I think, just for its cost and its ability. Like, the amount of damage that it deals is pretty significant. Strangers really like to be aggressive and attack in kind of suicidally. Grim Stranger really helps them out in doing that. You have a lot of strangers and you play a Grim Stranger, you can just burn out a game. That's a pretty powerful effect. I think this card is quite good. I think it's probably the source of the best Stranger decks in Ranked. I don't actually know if I'd play it in Draft. I think even if I had Strangers, I'd play something else, because Strangers aren't necessarily going to be as aggressive in Draft as they are in Ranked. But it's the best Ranked Stranger. Harbinger's Bite. Cutely, a reference to Black Sky Harbinger, which is later here in the set. Lifesteal, deal 1 damage to 2 enemies. One of the trickier cards. This card has to compete with Lightning Storm, which makes it a little bit tricky, because as a result it often doesn't see as much play. And that's the only reason why this card isn't good. The deal 1 damage to 2 enemies is a pretty powerful effect. It works well with snowballs, which are in blue. It works well with a lot of purple stuff, and the lifesteal effect is also quite nice. I think this card is a great anti-aggro card. It's a good anti-aggro card in Feln in particular, but you already have Lightning Storm, so you often don't see it played as much. Yeah, it's okay in Draft. The effect is often not good enough to be removal, and that can be kind of tricky, because Draft is not usually about a ton of 1/1 tokens running down your face, so as a result, it's pickable, but not necessarily the best thing in the world. Pick it if you have snowballs. Haunting Scream. Play a unit with cost 4 or less from the void. It gets charge and flying. Sacrifice it at end of turn. This card makes all infiltrate cards incredibly deadly. The big deck that was around very early on, and which is still a good popper deck, is play Direwood Beastcallers. Try to get your opponent to block or kill Direwood Beastcallers. Haunting Scream Direwood Beastcallers. Then get yourself 2 5/5s at like 2 cost or 3 cost. That's basically what Haunting Scream does. Yeah, so this recurs a lot of useful creatures. Tends to be a very useful Swiss Army knife. It's even good in Draft, because you can get back a lot of creatures that have really useful effects, including cards, not only infiltrate cards, but cards like Jotun something or other, the 4 cost one that stuns people. Yeah, there are a lot of different summon effects that you can trigger, and every once in a while you can just swing in for a huge amount of damage with a charge flying creature. It's a pretty hard card to block, and it's a card that people have to be really on the lookout for in Feln. If you aren't paying attention to Haunting Scream, you're gonna get rocked by it. Feln Bloodcaster, and hello, I'm wearing a different shirt now because this card has been updated. So this used to give every creature deadly, and it was an okay body that you really didn't want to play all that much, because the deadly effect didn't really do very much. Cards in blue and purple just didn't really need deadly most of the time. They had flying, they had unblockable, they were already being very aggressive and didn't mind trading in with creatures. So yeah, Bloodcaster didn't actually do a ton. It was still an okay card in some control matchups, and now it's a great card in some control matchups. So what this does is, at 7, you can pay it 1 time, a cost of 7, to draw a card from each player's deck. If you do this at 10 power, then it is impossible to counter this effect in any way. But obviously, if you play it down and then play it on the next turn, they have a chance to kill it before it happens. They have a chance to silence it. They have a chance to do stuff. So this card is a really reasonable body, and it also grants you a pretty decent amount of card advantage. I would say it's a pretty good pick in draft, in particular because of the stats. The one thing that you have to worry about is that double shadow influence combined with a primal influence. There are not actually that many cards that require 3 influence of 2 different colors to get essentially a 3-cost card, right? So this is really pretty deep in Feln, and you have to pretty much be in exactly those colors to make it work. Overall, I think that the card advantage that it provides is pretty neat. It's nice to have other card advantage engines because there actually aren't that many of them in Eternal. So this is a pretty nice one that fits on a good body that's very good at blocking and preventing aggro strategies from dealing with you. The 5 health means that it's basically invulnerable to torches, it's fairly hard to kill, and the 2 power means that it's also going to be blocking most of the little weenies and other things that come at you, like 3/2s, there are lots of 4/2s, there are lots of things that essentially Feln Bloodcaster gets to kill very easily. The fact that it draws a card from each player's deck means that most of the time one of the cards that it gets you is not going to be worth all that much. In fact, once again, it's very likely to draw you power. But overall, having a Pilfer effect stacked on top of an extra draw does give you a ton of advantage, and you can use it the same way that you use Pilfer effects to steal cards that have War Cries on them, to steal cards that are otherwise, unstealable. Yeah, this card is really neat in that particular respect. I think this card is very strong. It's a very good ranked pick for any sort of slow Feln control, and I'm looking forward to seeing a lot more decks with it in them at the moment. Currently, Scouting Party has this kind of a little bit less attractive because there are some other good card draw options right now, and Scouting Party is kind of making things crazy. Most of the decks are trying to play a little bit faster than Feln Bloodcaster likes to play. But this is the card that you play in a deck that has Dimensional Rift in it, because it is just good and slow and fun. And also, it's just a lovely card in draft if you're in those colors. And that's what I have to say about that one. Gorgon Fanatic, 3/2 sacrifice to draw 3 cards. Yeah, this is a powerful, powerful draw effect. It usually ends up replacing Wisdom of Elders in people's decks, and it can just sort of win you the game if you are continually attacking with Gorgon Fanatics, giving them flying, giving them ghost form, giving them all sorts of ways to actually attack in and infiltrate, sacrificing them, and then bringing them back with Haunting Scream. That draws you so many cards that it's just ridiculous. If Fanatic hits, it is often just winning the game. If it doesn't hit, then it is often just losing the game. It'll draw a billion cards. It also does damage that is not insubstantial. You hit with enough Fanatics, you will just almost outright kill your opponent, and it's pretty easy to finish them off from there. Midnight Gale, 4/3 flying, infiltrate, gains lifesteal. This card is a beating. It's got that slight problem of 3 toughness, which makes it fairly vulnerable to Torch. It's also got that slight problem of 4 power, which makes it fairly vulnerable to Vanquish. This card is one of the most easy to kill cards in the game, and it doesn't really care. It's got enough of a thing going on with the lifesteal and the amount of damage that it's doing that it doesn't mind being a rather efficient tempo creature. It's aggressive and angry, and it really, really doesn't like... it really, really doesn't like you. If it gets through and gets a lifesteal off, that can be really quite devastating. This card is not exactly flowers and sunshine for the opposing team. Here's the premium version. Recurring Nightmare. Flying, charge, infiltrate, double its power, and put it into your hand. So every time you attack with it, it comes a 2/1, a 4/1, an 8/1, a 16/1, and a 32/1. Although 16/1 is usually the point where your opponent dies. If it isn't that point, then 32/1 will definitely do it. This card is a brutal beating for anyone who forgot to put removal in their deck, especially fast removal. The decks that are built around it and ranked are mostly okay. They're not that great. The fact that they kind of have to support this creature, and if the creature dies in any way, they don't really have a way to answer or like finish you off, can be really threatening. Still, this card is really, really good at just slipping under. It's a pretty excellent card in draft. If you get into a race situation, then sometimes Recurring Nightmare can lose, and that's a little bit risky. But yeah, like that's the 2 situations where it's bad: if it gets killed or if it loses the race. This card is hard to answer, and people do not like it. If you can actually lightning strike it, or torch it, or block it with a flyer or something like that, then it just kind of goes away. The thing about it is that if it dies, it can still be Haunting Screamed. And while haunting stream creatures are usually sacrificed at the end of turn, if Recurring Nightmare hits you, it goes back into your hand, and then it can't be sacrificed. Yeah, Nightmare's a lot of fun. It's a decent enough card in Standard. It's a good popper deck if you really want to like just make somebody's life hard. It's a good way to win in Feln if you are just starting out in Feln. So if you get this card, you can build a deck around it and make it quite good without actually having to put a lot of expensive cards into it. It's certainly fun. Trickster's Cloak, +2/+2 and unblockable. Doesn't do quite enough to really see a lot of play in Standard. Really a lovely card in Draft. The +2/+2 alone is relevant, and the unblockable effect means that you get a lot of your cool Feln Infiltrate effects off, as well as a lot of your blue Infiltrate effects, and a lot of other things that you would rather, like, just, you know, get that extra damage through. This card really does a lot of work in that particular respect. Haven't seen it in Ranked at all, but yeah, good stuff. Feeding Time. Transform a unit into a pig and then kill it. Good way to remove something from your life forever. People do not really like to revive pigs. They do like to revive creatures that have abilities and skills. So as a result, Feeding Time is just like sort of the final say on whether or not a creature lives or dies. And yeah, this card is quite good. It sacrifices what Deathstrike has going for it, which is that it's a fast spell, for a little bit more in terms of permanence. And as a result, it's a pretty solid meta card. Hello, Champion of Cunning. Hello, Darkness, my old friend. Okay, so this is a 4/4. If it meets its purple requirement, then all of your units have +1/+1 in charge. That's all of your units, not just Champion of Cunning. If it meets its influence requirements for blue, then all of your creatures have +1/+1 in flying. Either effect is usually deadly the turn that Champion of Cunning is played. Like, if you are in a decent board position, you can take this thing out and just run people over for 24 to 30 some damage. And it's pretty ridiculous. This card is very good at killing slow decks. It just loves to kill slow decks, because any slow control deck that really just like wants to kill this card can't. Like, there's no way to stop it from doing the thing that it wants to do, which is usually just like running in and murdering your day. Like, it is fairly hard to answer because it has its effect the moment that it comes out on the board. Most of the ways that you can kill it are just not fast enough. The only thing that really works is Deathstrike, and you have to have 4 power up for it, and you have to see it coming. Usually you will see it coming in Feln, but like even so, like that's a lot of power to be holding up for it. It doesn't die to Annihilate because Annihilate, while being a fast spell, doesn't affect hybrid creatures. There aren't a lot of good ways to silence it. You can try to get it inside the person's hand, but I think it's a little bit too unreliable. I hate this card with a Fiery Passion just because it's so hard to answer. I will certainly play it though. This card works really well with a Witching Hour. If you Champion of Cunning and then a Witching Hour for 0, then you have generated enough power to kill your opponent in 1 turn with 2 cards. It's pretty brutal. Yeah, this card basically just makes a Feln control deck suddenly explode and kill you, and it does so in a way that's not counterable, so it's very, very good. Generally just sticks right there in the middle of things that are just impossibly difficult to answer. I find this card very frustrating. I find it very good as well, and there is a very strong pair of Feln decks that are using Champion of Cunning on the ladder right now. One is straight Feln, just Champion of Cunning, and that's all it needs. The other one is Feln plus Stone Scar, and just plays a lot of good units like Champion of Chaos and Champion of Cunning. Great card in Ranked. It's only okay in Draft, but it's still pretty good. It usually ends up as a 5/5 flyer or a 5/5 charge, and either one is quite solid. Spell Swipe. Negate an enemy spell and steal it. This is, if you can hold 5 mana for a turn, which is not just necessarily easy, a great way to just blow out your opponent. It's such a fun counterspell. This card really wins the long game, but it's not very good on the short game. It's not recommended in either Draft or Standard. You could, yeah, no, it's not recommended in either Draft or Standard. Still could be used, but for the most part, it doesn't work too well. If you play a very, very long game and you really, really want to win against all the other control decks, Spell Swipe is great. Spell Swiping a Channel of the Tempest is just game over for most decks. Withering Witch. Each enemy unit's health becomes 1. This works well with Harbinger's Bite, it works well with Lightning Storm, it works well with a lot of blue cards that just really like to kill things, it works well with Plague, it works well with just all of blue and purple's mass removal. And it's a 1/4, which means that it also just gets to kill something that each when it makes every enemy unit's health become 1. So yeah, it's a good trade that also has a good effect. This card is very strong. It does see some play in Standard. Hasn't seen a lot of it lately. It's a little too slow. Black Sky Harbinger. Hello again, it's me, Different Shirted Pojo. This card recently got an extra point of health. It's now a 3/5 instead of a 3/4, and it deals 1 damage to each enemy as a summon effect. So the lifesteal here applies to the summon effect, where it deals 1 damage to each enemy, meaning that Black Sky Harbinger often comes out and swings in for like, it gets like 7 or 8 health when you play it, especially if you play it on a board that's full of tokens. So any time you have a lot of little 1/1s, Black Sky Harbinger is just one of the best plays at 6 that you can possibly get. It's a great anti-aggro card. The extra health means that it's even better at anti-aggro, and it's generally just a decent card to run. This card works well with Withering Witch. If you make everyone's creature's health 1 and then play out Black Sky Harbinger, you just wipe the entire board, and that's a turn 5, turn 6 play that is not bad for tempo. This card also pops Aegises. It's pretty good against quite a few like Rakano matchups, I think. And it's just a little bit fat and good at blocking. So yeah, there's a lot of cool things that this card can do. And in terms of like purple-blue tempo, this is something that is fairly strong. And you can also run it in some control matchups if you're looking to gain a decent amount of life and also play a reasonable body. I think it's a very strong card in draft, obviously, if you can get one. It is a legendary, so you're not likely to. And yeah, if you can play it in ranked, it's worth playing. It's currently not in any of the party hour decks that are kind of dominating the Feln meta at the moment, but once Champion of Cunning gets a nerf, gosh, I hope Champion of Cunning gets a nerf, then this card will be a lot better to play and will be really quite great. I think it's exceptional value for its cost, and it is just a really great creature to be playing in Feln colors. Cabal Mastermind. If it ever works, I'll let you know. Infiltrate, steal the enemy player's hand. It's a really powerful effect if you can play it. In particular, when a Northwind Herald morphs into a Cabal Mastermind, it just ends the game, and that's one of my favorite things about Northwind Herald. Yeah, Cabal Mastermind is a very strong effect against many control decks. Usually Azindal's Gift is a lot more reliable, but stealing the enemy's player hand is a very fun effect, and if you can get it out with something quick, then it is going to crush. Nightmaw Sight Unseen. All your units are unblockable. This card pairs well with Champion of Cunning if you're like managing to resurrect a whole bunch of creatures all at once somehow. This card pairs well with a lot of different stuff. I think this card is very, very strong. The only thing is that it's kind of outshone by Champion of Cunning, which does almost exactly the same thing. I've talked about this quite a bit, how unblockable units are just like, in general, a little poorly statted and poorly costed in comparison to flying units. And flying units will usually do the job in Standard. Yeah, this card is a beating. It's stronger than it looks. It definitely doesn't really work right now in ranked. Or at least there isn't a deck built around it. Snow Crush Animist. Deadly, kill all enemy units with 3 power or less, stun all other enemy units. So a 4/5 Deadly is not a bad body. The 8 cost is pretty ridiculous, but the effect is immediate and quite disgusting. The thing that happens to this most often is it gets Grasping and Shadowed, and just stolen for 5 from your own void. When that happens, that's a pretty good effect. At 8, it's a little bit rough, but it is going to completely clear the board for all of your attackers, which is a pretty good way to win the game. The stun effect doesn't last all the time, but it still stuns every enemy unit that isn't 3 power or less, and the amount of units it kills is usually value. So this card is very, very strong value in a creature form. You usually need to find some way to cheat it out. Dimensional Rift is another card that usually you need to find some way to cheat out, but it's just sort of the be-all, end-all of control matchups. Kill 2 random enemy units, stun 2 random enemy units, draw 2 random units from the void, and draw 2 cards. That's almost 8 for 1 card advantage. I believe it's 6 for 1 card advantage, and then the 2 stuns are just kind of an extra bonus. It's really quite a powerful card, and it is definitely a card that you want to be casting at 10 power. If you ever get up to 10 power, there aren't that many decks that run this right now, but when they do, they usually try to cheat it. You know, it's pretty lovely. Let's see here. I feel like I missed Stone Scar, right? Yeah. I'm only looking at blues. I don't know when that happened. That's okay. So we missed Stone Scar cards. Let's talk about Stone Scar cards.